Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Lean 101 for Office and Service on this Monday morning, afternoon, and in some cases, evening. I hope you had a great weekend, and this is an experiment, having our first webinar on a Monday to see how that works for folks. It's every day of the week seems to have issues, certain standing meetings that interfere, so I try to move things around a little bit to offer those that may not be able to attend Tuesday, Thursday sessions to get in on some of these. So without further ado, let's get started. So for those of you who are new, if you're using a telephone to listen in, make sure you enter your audio pin to be able to listen from the telephone. So you use a pound sign before the audio pin and then after it as well, and that should allow you to listen. And then there are two ways to ask questions. For just as a review for most of you, you can either raise your hand and I will call on you. We can talk verbally and everyone can hear you. Or you can type a question into the question log, and you can type these questions in throughout the webinar, but I am going to hold all questions until we get to our question and answer period, which is typically at about 11 o'clock Pacific time. So we'll have an hour of content and then a half hour for questions. Speaking of which, this webinar was quite challenging to figure out exactly what to cover in an hour. It's not much time, and there's a lot to talk about with Lean, and as far as the big picture, philosophy, principles, and some of the basic tools. So I'm hoping that we'll have a very active Q&A today. There's no way I can possibly cover everything that you might want to know about Lean, so I'm hoping you'll have lots of questions and we can have an active 30-minute session at the end. Now, the links to the slides, most of you are familiar with this, this approach. What happens is when you get your authorization email the day before the webinar, there's a link in there that you can go to get the handouts or slides. And then it's also was on the first slide today, but here it is again. And it's also in the chat session if you don't see it anywhere else. Also, could you do me a favor, please? Those of you that have been on before, could we do a quick sound check? Could you raise your hand and make sure that I'm coming out loud and clear? Okay, excellent. Thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead. Thank you. All right, I'm going to go ahead and put your hands down now. So everyone's got their hands down. Good, thank you. And let's go ahead and move on. Our content for today is to go through key lean principles and what the different kinds of waste are that you see in office and service. Now, just a quick heads up on this one. We could spend an entire hour just looking at office waste and how it manifests in office and service environments. So I'm going through the waste quite quickly today in order to allow some time for some of the other topics I think are important. But again, if you have any questions at the end about how a particular waste might look in your environment, please ask and I'll give you lots of ideas. We're also going to go through the key metrics, the time and quality metrics that are critical for identifying and eliminating waste and creating efficient processes and effective processes. And then we'll talk very quickly about the typical improvement cycle and what the various stages are of that using PDCA, the basic lean tools that you need to at least stabilize your processes even before sometimes you make major change, and then finally the stages of a lean transformation. I think it's important that people understand that this isn't something that happens very quickly. You can get quick hits and small hits quickly, but for full transformation, it's a 10-year journey. So for those of you who may not know me, just a little bit about me is I do specialize in the office and service sector, and my clients range from financial services to healthcare to energy, distribution, government, law enforcement, etc. And I'm the co-author of a book called The Kaizen Event Planner that's all about planning and executing Kaizen events in those settings, as well as the co-developer with Mike Osterling of a approach called metrics-based process mapping. That's a pretty effective approach for identifying and eliminating waste. And as far as you go, what we have on the phone today, I thought it might be helpful for you to know who your brothers and sisters are on the phone today. Most of you have a basic understanding of Lean. We've got a fair number of true beginners. And then there's a fair number of you that are skilled, which is intriguing to me that you're on a basic Lean 101 course. But sometimes I think what is helpful for skilled and highly skilled people is to learn how to talk about Lean to those who aren't. So hopefully that's why you're on the phone. And then as far as your journey and how far along your organizations are that you work for, it looks as though most of you have some experience with Lean. There are a number of you that haven't started the journey yet at all, which is always very exciting to me. And then some of you have had moderate, and then only a few of you have significant experience on the Lean journey as your company goes. So before we get going, I just came back from a client last week, and I taught 3 different groups of people who are kind of new to Lean, and I realized that there were some basic misunderstandings about processes even in general. So I want to start with just a basic foundation of what a process is. For those of you that are quite skilled in this area, if you could just hang with me until I get everyone up to speed, I'd really appreciate it. So just to define a process, and what we mean by a process is that it's the steps you take to accomplish anything. So when you think about getting ready for work in the morning, preparing Thanksgiving dinner, going out to a movie even is a process. Everything you do at work is a process. And I was intrigued last week with the number of folks in the class where I had to just stop and go back and help them understand that their work is indeed a series of processes. The way I tend to categorize processes is that in non-manufacturing you've got 4 different kinds. You've got the service type of process where you have a live being. I had human beings there at first, but then I thought, well, what about the vets of the world? There are animals too. So service to a being or equipment. And then there's transactional processes where you're doing this highly repeatable, repetitious transaction to data. It can have high variation, but it's a high volume process typically. Analytical processes such as in engineering and research, science, those kinds of environments. And then finally creative in the film world, any of the visual arts, writing, any of those areas are creative processes. But nevertheless, they are processes. So in a process, we basically have a customer that's making a request or submitting an order. Maybe it's an official order, and then that request comes into our internal system. And now in this case, we've got 4 steps in our internal system. And so these are the steps that either individuals or departments or work groups or sometimes divisions take, if you look at it at a high level, in order to fulfill that customer request and deliver back to the customer. Now, a couple more terms that you should know because I'll be using them. Input. So the customer releases something that's input into the first system or the first step in the internal process, which may be a written order. It could be electronic information. It could be a phone call. It could even be an internal customer stopping someone in a hallway and saying, hey, Joe, I need this. Then each of the steps provides output that becomes input to the next step. So in this case, step 1's output becomes step 2's input, etc. And then at the final step, we have final output delivering back to the customer, and that's where we get our full loop of order to receipt or request to delivery. Now, upstream means anything going back toward the customer in the process, and downstream is movement toward the delivery of the final output. So if you hear me use those terms, upstream and downstream, you'll know which direction I mean. And then finally, everyone in a process serves as both a supplier and a customer unless you're the first or the last person in the chain. So step 1, for example, is the supplier to step 2, who's their internal customer. And then step 2 becomes a supplier for step 3, which is the customer, and so forth. So that supplier-customer relationship is really important for everyone to understand. And in many organizations, when I walk in, they've never even thought of it that way. And so the first thing is just getting everyone to understand who their customer is. Quick history of Lean, just if you want to know a little bit about its roots. It actually was born primarily with Henry Ford and the Model T. And then when the Toyota family was starting to look at which industry they wanted to go into back in the 20s, automotive industry looked attractive, and they started studying the Henry Ford's production line and why it is that he was able to make such consistently good cars. And then W. Edwards Deming, Dr. Deming, entered into the picture in the 1950s, and at that point he wasn't really being listened to much in the U.S., but we encouraged him to go to Japan and help them after World War II. So he did. They listened, and they listened well. In 95, around 95, lean really started taking off in the United States. As people were studying the automotive industry in Japan and studying Toyota, they started being more and more intrigued with how Toyota was able to successfully produce these high-quality, reasonably priced cars. And then in 1996 is when it really got going, when Jim Womack wrote the seminal book, Lean Thinking. And that was the first book to hit the market that really focused on what Toyota production system was about. And then as far as industries embracing it, of course, manufacturing took it on right then and there in 96 in some pockets. But then it was in the early 2000s when the military looked at it and thought that it had a lot of applicability for the whole service and engineering sides of the military, as well as material control. And then finally, about the first part of the first decade in the 2000s, the service sector, healthcare, financial services, et cetera, took lean and started having great success with it. And now every industry is involved in lean. Any organization of note in any industry, including government, and now finally into education, one of the last to the table, are also on the lean journey in various forms. The new thing that started last year is looking at moving from tools to culture, and knowing that the tools are necessary but they're not sufficient to get a lean culture in place. So that's the new emphasis is on, now that we have so many people proficient in the tools, there's still some challenges in getting organizations to transform quickly into a lean enterprise, and that's where lean leadership and culture come in. So if you look at overall the whole Toyota production system and what makes it so successful, there are many different facets to what Toyota production system is and what lean is. But if you boil them all down to the two fundamental tenets, one is this whole idea of Kaizen, or continuous improvement, where there's this relentless pursuit for perfection and this relentless elimination of waste. So everyone in the organization needs to be taught how to see waste and then how to eliminate waste. And again, that needs to be done within a context that supports it by strong leaders, well-educated leaders on what lean is and all of those elements that make for success with process design. Now, the other tenet is respect for people. And so one of the things that I like to say, and sometimes people are a little taken aback by it, is that if you look at a poorly designed process, it actually is disrespecting the workers that do the work. Because what we should be doing is making brilliant processes that allow even an average person to succeed and perform well, rather than expecting everyone to be brilliant, which of course is never going to happen in a workforce. You can't possibly get everyone being a A student. If we make our processes brilliant, however, those B and C students can thrive and survive and be successful, and our processes will perform well. So my kind of new bandwagon is we need to just start shifting our attention so much from managing people and far more on managing processes, because with well-designed processes, the people actually manage themselves quite easily. And then the last thing is that the front lines need to be authorized to solve the problems themselves. So gone are the days where it's command and control leadership, where leadership maybe determines some sort of a strategy, but it may be murky at best. But then they get very, very involved in the weeds and dictating change at the front lines and in the weeds. Now we're teaching front lines how they can solve problems themselves and free up leadership so that they can focus on strategy and vision and looking ahead, which is what leaders really need more time to be able to do. So if you look at overall organizational performance and what makes a company thrive, there are really 5 different aspects to performance. There's the quality of the service or product that they produce, the cost of it, and this is both the price of it that customers pay as well as the internal cost or the expenses that you incur in order to deliver it. There's the speed at which you're able to deliver and the quality of service involved with delivering the product or service. There's the safety of both your customers and your workforce. That's key, paramount to success. And then finally, the morale of the workforce so that you can attract and retain talented workers, which are the ones that actually deliver value to the customers. So we want the best workers possible in any organization. So what's happened over the years is that very few companies have embraced Lean as this overall business management approach that tackles all 5 of these buckets of performance. Many, many leaders have been short-sighted in thinking that it's merely a process design strategy. And while it's a brilliant process design strategy, that is leaving so much of what Lean offers on the table, and it's the shift that we're now seeing toward that business management approach that's starting to attract attention of leaders that maybe before didn't see how broad it really is. So now Lean is being used in the way we develop products, the way we interface with suppliers, the way we hire people, the way we keep our books. Lean accounting is a very growing body of knowledge now. So it really is a much broader approach than just process design. Now, if you look at what it takes to make a Lean organization, be able to achieve to that level, it isn't easy. There's a whole building block process that has to occur in order to get that level of performance. So it starts all the way down here with knowing who your customers are and what they value. And then there's an analysis phase of looking at how you're delivering your services or goods. And then there's the ability to embed into the DNA of an organization both the continuous improvement you get with daily Kaizen and these occasional Kaizen events that you need for some of the more heavy lifting types of improvements. And when you do all of that, you get a highly motivated workforce. Now, that workforce needs to be well skilled, and so there's a whole set of bricks that are used in order to actually make the changes, different tools. And when we use those, we're able to get both quality and speed. Or in the case of the traditional Toyota house, it's just in time and Jidoka. But with quality and speed, we are finally able to get flow so that work flows through the system rather than being hung up and having these obstacles that slow it down and cause our customers to be unhappy, cause employees to be unhappy, and cause kind of a wide variety of dysfunction within a system. When you are able to achieve flow through good speed, good quality, and reasonably priced products and services, you get customer loyalty. And that's ultimately what we're looking to do, is to serve customers better and better and better. And that's what Lean is all about. So let's take a look now at 6 key principles of Lean. Only do what the customer values. Eliminate all of the obstacles that prevent work from flowing through the system, make all problems visible so we don't hide from them anymore, solve problems using disciplined methodology and solve problems immediately, know that the people doing the work know best, so it's not a matter of relying on a Six Sigma black belt, a leader, or a consultant to tell you what needs to be done. It's teaching people how to fish, giving them the skills they need to see the work and to design it themselves. We're really just teachers and guides and coaches, senseis, using a Japanese term for teacher. That's what our role is. And then finally, this relentless pursuit for perfection and continuously improve. So let's start with number 1, what the customer values. This is where it gets very interesting when you get out of manufacturing and start looking at office and service. Value adding is any operation or activity that your external customers, not your internal customers, your external customers would be willing to pay for if they knew the cost of it. So in many operations outside of manufacturing, the customer isn't paying directly for their services. For example, in healthcare, healthcare is one of those situations where you've got all these different levels of payers that are contributing money to the ultimate bill, and the customer themselves is only paying a very small percentage of that. So it's anything that if they knew the cost and if they were paying the full bill, they would be willing to pay for. So anything else is non-value adding. So any operation or activity that consumes up time or resources but doesn't add value is non-value adding. Now there are 2 kinds of non-value adding. There's the necessary component, which are support processes, regulatory requirements, all of those types of things, meeting regulatory requirements. And then there's everything else. And it's the everything else that's our primary focus in Lean. It's the eliminating that waste, the unnecessary tasks or work, where not only does a customer not value it and would not be willing to pay for it, but we don't have to do it. So you have to be very willing to challenge everything and decide which of these three buckets is it. Is it value adding, is it necessary non-value adding, or is it unnecessary non-value adding? Now I want to go back to necessary non-value adding for a second, because I part company with a lot of my fellow consultants and lean teachers out there on this term non-value adding. There are a fair number of people out there that consider it offensive to say that work is non-value adding, even if it's unnecessary non-value adding. And I like to call things as they are, and to tell the truth, and to label things appropriately and truthfully. So I don't like to mince words and come up with fancy words for something that it is. The interesting thing in the office and service side is that, well, actually in manufacturing as well, you have entire departments that are non-value adding. Entire departments. And some people are really afraid to say that, but it is what it is. In the eyes of an external customer, they don't care about how you go about hiring people. They just want you to have people that deliver good work. They don't care about your IT systems and how you maintain them. They just want them maintained to the point where you can deliver good work. They don't care about your legal, your financial, your compliance departments. They don't care. They care about getting a high-quality product at a reasonable cost and quickly. That's what they care about. So this necessary non-value adding is a very important part of what we look at, and it's not that we don't challenge it at all. We still do challenge that, but we understand that we have entire departments that are necessary for the business to be successful, but the outside customer really doesn't value it at all. So if you look at the amount of work that's done in an organization or a department, what you end up finding is, in the case of a department where they are in fact delivering direct value to a customer, it still is a very small slice of the overall time that's consumed doing work. And then there's a bigger slice that's the necessary non-value adding piece, but a whole lot of work that we do is waste and could be eliminated. And in a department where there's no value being added directly to the customer, the external customer, then in fact this green would not exist at all, and it would just be yellow and red. The slices of the pie would be yellow and red. So now let's look at the 8 different kinds of waste. Toyota pretty much has 7 wastes in their classic list, and we've added underutilized people here in the United States because we do have a fairly significant problem with it. So let's take a look at them one by one. Or actually, we're not going to look at them one by one, but I am going to give you examples of each of them. This piece of the training is usually about an hour, so I just don't have the time in a 1-hour webinar to go one by one and show pictures and all those things. But let's take a look at some examples at least, and to get you thinking about how these wastes manifest in your environment. So overproduction is anything that's produced in excess where the downstream customer that's receiving it cannot take action immediately. So the symptom is WIP, or work in process. So anywhere where you've got queuing, work that's piling up, you've got overproduction on your hands. So for example, if a request or requisition of some sort goes down a chain and then it finally becomes a purchase order, those POs that are waiting to be ordered, that is a sign of overproduction. Contracts waiting to be signed, radiology reports waiting to be transcribed, lab specimens waiting to be tested. You can name it anywhere. Mortgage applications waiting for final review. Anything like that would be a sign of overproduction. The work has stopped. There is no flow. Inventory. In the office and service arena, inventory is primarily office supplies and any kind of hard copies. I mean, there are other things as well, but most of the work that accumulates I refer to as WIP, or work in process, and inventory is reserved for really physical items. So that's how I view inventory in the office and in the service arena. Waiting. Waiting is a waste, and think about the amount of waiting that's done for meetings to begin, for approvals to be given, for shared equipment to become available if you walk to a piece of shared equipment like a copier or a fax, waiting for the system to respond if you've got hang-ups in your IT systems, those kinds of things. Overprocessing, excessive reporting, where reports are generated and no one reads them, or 2 reports are created that are slightly different and with a slight modification could be merged into one report. Excessive reviews and approvals, redundant data entry. All those things are examples of overprocessing. So hopefully already you're starting to go, oi, we got a lot of waste going on around here, which what I say about that is job security. A lot of waste to be gotten rid of. All right, next, errors. So errors, anytime someone receives input from an upstream supplier, anytime that input is not 100% usable as is, if they have to correct, add missing information, or clarify the information, that is an error, and rework is being done. And that takes extra time, which takes extra cost in labor expenses, etc. So any kind of error is waste. Motion. This is people motion. This is people walking to shared equipment, walking hard copies to downstream customers. While we want people to get exercise, we want them to get exercise by taking a true break. No work. Go outside, take a walk around the block, go to the cafeteria, get a drink. Do whatever, just take a complete break from work and get your motion that you need that way. Transportation, sending hard copies that could be electronic, sending documents overnight that could go 2-day, or any type of movement of materials. So motion is people, transportation stuff. And by the way, electronic transportation counts. Electronic transportation isn't free. Systems have to have increasing amounts of bandwidth, RAM, hard drives, servers, you name it, in order to manage all that electronic information. So it's not free, and it is in fact a waste to be transporting anything anywhere. It certainly is better electronic than hard copy, but it's still, don't not look at waste in the transportation area just because it's electronic. And finally, underutilization of people. If you're not having someone utilize fully their knowledge, their skills, their ability to learn, and their creativity, you've got underutilization of people on your hands. So anywhere where you've got departments where people are like little robots and they have very narrow scopes of responsibility and they haven't been cross-trained to do a broader set of skills or jobs and tasks, that's underutilization. Not properly trained. I find training to be woefully weak in most organizations. Organizations do this fine job on training on diversity and benefits and these kinds of things, but not nearly enough on the actual job and how people have to work day in and day out. Step 1, Step 2, Step 3, how to be successful at that. And finally, not using people for designing improvements. That's also underutilization of people. So the lists are very long. These are just a couple of examples under each waste, but there are literally hundreds of examples in the organizations I work with that are each of these 8 wastes. Here's another couple of examples of how much waste can add up. So if you think about making improvement, just keep remembering single hits add up. Here's an example of an organization. This was a real client with 1,500 employees, and each employee was spending an average of 10 minutes. Actually, there were a number of employees spending up to 30 and 40 minutes a day looking for equipment or material. They were looking on hard drives or in the hallways. This happened to be a hospital. And what you find is if every employee across an organization is averaging about 10 minutes of looking on shared drives and looking for reports and looking for a blood pressure cuff, etc., that's a week of work time per year for every single employee. So it's a week they could be taking a vacation, or it's a week they could be providing greater value to customers. And it's typically pretty frustrating. Waste is pretty frustrating, so it's not doing anything to help morale. On an organization-wide level, that number of people looking for only a mere 10 minutes a day adds up to 30 FTEs, or full-time equivalents. So 2 half-time people would be 1 FTE. 30 people over a course of a year, you could say, are being used doing nothing but looking for things. No value being added whatsoever. That translates into, in this case, $1.4 million of wasted labor expense, and that's unloaded. That's just straight at $22 per hour. So you add in benefits and all that. That's a lot of money that's going toward non-value-adding work instead of putting that money toward value-adding work, innovation, not working 80 hours a week, all those types of things that come when you free capacity by reducing waste. Here's another funny little example of an organization that had 6 months of supply in their paper goods in their in one of their divisions, and a year's worth of printer cartridges supply because someone got a good deal on buying a large volume. And yet they received daily deliveries from their office supply vendor. So if you look at the cartridges, this is $18,000, over $18,000 sitting there that's cash tied up that can't be used for anything else. And of that $18,000, over $6,000 of it was obsolete, and it couldn't even be returned for credit because those printers were no longer in existence. So by getting your arms around office supplies, you think that office supplies aren't a big deal, but they really are, especially in a large organization. It really starts adding up. So getting a control on office supplies and getting flow in office supplies is a very good lean. It's an honorable lean task. Here's one more example. Here's in a situation where 2 departments shared a printer. And you can see that they measured how many feet per trip they walked on average, how many times they did that per day. And in the office and service world, we figure that it's about 1 mile to 1.5 miles per hour of actual walk speed. So you might be thinking, well, that is really slow. I walk a lot faster than that. You do. But what happens is when people start walking around to deliver things or go to shared equipment, they get stopped. They get sidetracked with questions or even just comments about the football game last night. They may have to wait when they get where they're going. So overall, it actually is a pretty slow walk pace. And when you calculate that out times the number of people doing that over the course of a year, here again we've got 2.2 full-time equivalents. All they're doing is walking to a printer. So for those of you in organizations that are switching from smaller printers to these big Mondo all-in-ones that are all the way in the corner of a big floor of an office building, this is the kind of business case you can start making to educate leadership and IT departments that because Canon comes in and tells you that the big gigantic all-in-one is going to save you money, they're only telling you part of the story. The other part of the story is a far more expensive part of the story, and that's the labor expense going to shared equipment. Even when you add in the extra IT expense of managing smaller pieces of equipment and more pieces, and the additional effort it takes to set them up and all that, even when you count that in, I guarantee you the business case is smaller pieces of equipment closer to where the work is done. Guarantee it. Been doing it now for about 4 years, and it's hands down. It's a beautiful thing when people see that these big pieces of equipment are not solving, and it's going completely the other direction from where lean is, completely the opposite direction. So the next thing, when you look at a current state of any process before it's gone through lean thinking, what you typically see is from request to delivery, a series of little tasks that are maybe value adding. This is across a whole process, so systems look here. And then you might have some necessary non-value adding, which is necessary to remain in business. And then you might find these pockets of unnecessary non-value adding tasks and activities. And then the blue is waiting. So the work waits, and then there's some action. And then it waits, and then there's action. Then it waits, and then there's action. Then it waits, and then there's action. What we want to do in the future state is not only get rid of all the red unnecessary non-value adding blocks, we might want to reduce some of the necessary non-value adding blocks. We might optimize some of the value adding. I mean, we might not right away, but we may eventually. Our first focus is definitely on removing the unnecessary non-value adding. But after you do all that, you basically take this whole timeline and you compress it. And it's like, you shrink this accordion and get rid of as much of that blue as possible. That's the goal of lean, is taking out that blue so that the work can flow through the system. So how do we do that? Well, we've got several diagnostic tools that we can use to start looking at our current state and gain a crisp understanding, very clear understanding of our current state. So let's take a look at each one of these. Now, a couple of you mentioned that you wanted to learn value stream mapping on this webinar. You can't learn value stream mapping in an hour, let alone a day. I mean, value stream mapping is a skill that takes some time to develop. So I'm just going to give you an overview of what a value stream map is, and then you'll have to attend a webinar or learn on your own or buy a book or go to a workshop to learn actually how to create current and future state value stream maps. So what is a value stream? A value stream is all of the activities that you do from a customer request or an order through to delivery. So if you look at any process through your organization, many of them cross multiple departments or work teams. In some cases, they actually cross multiple divisions. And sometimes it's global, sometimes it's local. It just depends on the process. So if you look at any work, you can look at it at different levels. You know, at the high level, we've got these big value streams at a macro level, and each one of those value streams is comprised of a series of processes, and then each process is comprised of a series of steps. And these are the little, micro tasks that are performed in order to complete that process. So from a diagnostic perspective, what we do is we look to value stream mapping when we're up at the high level making a strategy for improvement. So leadership is heavily involved in value stream mapping because we're setting strategy. And then in the weeds, we look at using metrics-based process maps because we're now making tactical improvements. And we need to sometimes get way down into the weeds to see the details of what's going on so that we implement the right countermeasures or the right solutions to the waste that we're seeing. So value stream maps are strategic, metrics-based process maps are tactical. So here's an example of a value stream map for an outpatient imaging service in a hospital. This is a hospital-based outpatient imaging, and I'm not going to go through this whole thing because it would take quite a few minutes to get through, but just look at a couple different things here. We've got a referring physician all the way up here in the upper right, and sawtooth means it's outside of our system, so this was a referring physician that's outside of the hospital, and their office staff calls the hospital to schedule the appointment, and then it gets passed to a department that pre-registers the patient, and then at some point the patient arrives whenever it's convenient for them because these are mostly non-urgent. And then when they arrive, they check into the admitting department, and then they check in at imaging. Then the tech preps the patient. This happens to be for CAT scans. And then the tech completes the exam. Then they transmit the images. The radiologist reads and dictates. The transcription agency transcribes it. Then it goes back to the radiologist for a sign-off. They print the reports, and then they send the reports back to the referring physician. So you see we've got order to delivery, request to receipt. It's a full circle. In the middle here is all the information flow, and visually you can already see that there's a lot of disjointed systems that don't talk to one another, and there is very little auto-populating going on between any of them, so it's all manual data entry. We start making visual observations as soon as we see the visual of this process. Value stream mapping is very powerful for manufacturing, but I argue it's even more powerful for non-manufacturing because we can't see the work. And so this allows us the ability to see for the first time ever how exactly work gets done in our systems. And leaders love this because for the first time they can get a grasp on how work actually happens. So if you take a look at that one, that's a full value stream. Now I want to show you another full value stream for a service operation, and again this is very small because it was a very complex operation, but here we've got an external customer that's requesting service by phone, and then you have a call center that receives the call, and it goes through a dispatching process, and then the tech gets involved to assess the problem and fix the problem, and then from this point on basically the customer's gotten their service here. So this part of the value stream, the first 5 blocks and back up to the customer, is the order to delivery from the customer's perspective. But look at the mayhem that occurs afterwards in order to get paid, for this company to get paid. The time cards and AP and invoicing and all of these different steps that it takes in order for the client to get paid. The organization to get paid. That was worthy of some analysis to see how to streamline it. So that is a current state map. And what we also look at in a value stream map is the difference between the time it takes to actually perform the work and the time it takes to get work all the way through the system, which includes all the delays that it hits and the obstacles. So let's talk about time. Let's talk about our key metrics that we're going to use for every process. Process time is the time it takes to actually do the work. In manufacturing, this metric is often referred to as cycle time, but cycle time has many, many definitions, and so I prefer to use the word process time or processing time. It seems a little more clear in the office and service world, but it would include the time that it takes to do the task as well as talking, or in the case of analysis, thinking. So any time that someone's doing work on that task and they're not doing anything else, that would be part of process time. Now that's different from lead time or throughput time or turnaround time, the elapsed time from the time work is made available until it's been completed and passed on. So I count process time as part of my lead time. Lead time is the total time, process time is the actual doing and thinking. So a way to look at this visually is if you've got work received in a department or a work group or at an individual level, it may sit for a while before the person can get to it because they're working on other tasks and the work's not balanced and all those things in the current state. Then they do the work that it takes to get the job done, and then it may sit for a while before it's passed on in the case of batching. It may not. I mean, this process time could be shifted all the way to the right, or it could be that the work gets done right away, but then it sits for a very large batch and it sits for a long time before it's passed on. So that's the relationship between lead time and process time. Most of the time in the beginning stages, these times are gotten through interviewing the people that do the work, and we seek directionally correct data. We seek accurate data, not necessarily precise data. And the reason being is that we don't need to take months to get precise data to make the same decisions we'd be making with accurate data. And people doing the work, once they understand the question you're asking them, are surprisingly accurate at knowing how long it takes them to do their work. So now if you take a look at that same timeline again, now we see we've got the total lead time from request to delivery across the bottom here, and then each one of these types of work is process time. It takes process time to deliver value add work, unnecessary non-value add, or necessary non-value add. So if we look over the whole system, what we want to do is add up all of the process time, whether it's value adding or not, add up the total lead time, and that gives us what we call percent activity or activity ratio. And that gives you this current state baseline of what percent of the time work is moving versus it's sitting idle. The workers aren't sitting idle, but the work is sitting idle. So in a current state, oftentimes that number is dreadfully low, like 1 to 10%. So again, you sum up the process time, divide it by the sum of the lead time, and times 100 to get it into the percentage, and that shows you the amount of time the work is moving in the system. So 100 minus that number would show you the percent of time the work is idle. Current state, solid baseline metric from which to measure improvement. Now, you could take the process time if you wanted to do another little fancy-dancy test. Take the process time and only count the value-adding process time. Do the same formula, and then you could get what's called the percent value-adding. And that number will be quite a bit lower in most office and service environments than the percent activity. So that's another baseline number you could use. Now, let's take our attention to quality. So time is the primary metric in Lean, absolutely, but quality is important. You can't reduce time without improving quality, because anytime you're doing rework, that extends your lead time, it extends your process time, increases your process time. So percent complete and accurate is a metric that was put out by Beau, Keyte, and Locher, which I'll show you a cover of their book in a minute here, back about, I don't know, maybe 6-7 years ago now, as the equivalent to those of you who are in manufacturing. This is the equivalent to first pass yield. But in the office and service arena, we call it percent complete and accurate. This is also obtained by interview. So what happens is we interview everybody and say, hey, when you get your work, what percent of the time can you do what you need to do without having to rework it, which we call cacking, which is correcting information that was supplied, adding information that should have been supplied, or clarifying information that could have or should have been clear. So it's not usable as is. You've got to do some kind of tweaking to it before you can do your work. Either the person receiving the work does the tweaking themselves in the current state, or they send it back upstream for correction or additional information, and then they start their work. So this is a metric that's measured by the immediate downstream customer to work that's being passed through a system. But it also is determined by anyone downstream from there, because sometimes 5 steps downstream, the person will have a problem with the quality of the work, and it will turn out that it was way upstream that that output came from that's causing that person's strife. So you have to just think about who was responsible for the output that is now being reworked. When you have cross-functional teams in a room and you're having this dialogue, you're interviewing people, it is so powerful to see what happens where you may have people that have been somewhat, let's just say, not necessarily getting along real well, a lot of tension maybe between departments or individuals, and it's almost always over this quality metric. And yet, 99% of the time, the upstream supplier did not know what the downstream customer's requirements were and did not know that they weren't delivering the quality. And they have a dialogue, and it melts away the tension between those two people or those two departments, and it never comes back. This is such a powerful metric. I love this metric. So once you get that for every step in the process, then if you look over an entire process, you can get a summary metric known as rolled first pass yield. Rolled means a product or a multiplication. First pass yield is the term we use in manufacturing, and I guess we could say rolled percent CNA, but it just seems awkward. So all you do is you multiply all the percent CNAs together, and a common finding is 0 to 15%. So meaning that 0% of the time does work go through the system without a hiccup, requiring some sort of rework. The 0, by the way, comes from any time one step is a 0, which is not all that uncommon. At least 50% of the time when I'm working with processes, someone somewhere along the chain will say none of the time do they get the work usable as is. They are 100% of the time doing some version of rework. So then what you do is you put your current state numbers on a matrix of this sort so that you can then measure your future state against that. And these 4 in red are the key metrics that must always be there. And then you have a number of additional metrics that might be relevant for that particular process. So it could be, for example, you see down here, you could maybe measure the metric just for one block that's really a, kind of a problem block or step in the process. You might include financials of some sort, surveys or audit results, turnover, employee turnover numbers, market share numbers, system downtime, inventory turns, hold times, telephone hold times, work volume. Anything that's relevant to that process that's worthy of being measured, you have the ability to add it in there. Then the other thing I want to mention is once you get to the future state, these numbers are going to be projected future state numbers until the process is well implemented and it's been working for a bit, and then you go back and measure it and see where it falls. So it's projected until validated. So here is the future state value stream map from our outpatient imaging map, and you'll see again these yellow bursts, not again, for the first time you're seeing these yellow bursts, which are called Kaizen bursts or improvement bursts. They are the things that have to be implemented in order to realize the future state and have that future state become the current state. The bursts are typically on the future state map, not the current state map. And then this becomes a living document as you're making changes. You have different versions. As you implement some of these things, your numbers start shifting, and you'll watch the value stream shift over the course of time it takes to implement the future state. Future state value stream maps are often 3 or 6 months out. They can be as long as 9 months or a year, but you don't want to really look beyond a year. It's not wise to look that far into the future. So anywhere from 3 to say 9 months is usually how long it takes to get a future state in place. Now, how do you actually plan for this? Well, you need to get your future state metrics, this is a projection of what the best guess of the team that know the work, what they think the numbers will result in once they get that future state implemented. This shows the percent of improvement that realizes. And then one little thing here you might want to note is that with the process time reduction from 56 to 43 minutes, the tech I forget how many minutes it was on this. I think it was 8 minutes we shaved off of her time or the text time. That allows the hospital to collect an additional $500,000 in revenue without adding equipment or staff, which is huge. And that's what we do to look when we shrink process time. We're looking to free capacity so we can bring in more revenue and not have to hire additional people to do it. And they're able to work more methodically and deliver higher quality. So this is the book I mentioned that I think of all the value stream mapping books out there is probably the best, with the exception of those of you in healthcare. There is a value stream mapping book in healthcare that I'd get in addition to this. I still think this one is the best put together that we've seen, and there isn't really a decent book out there yet, I don't think, that addresses just office and service. So Beau, Keyte, and Drew Locher are the authors, and they're the ones that came up with that metric percent CNA, percent complete and accurate. So that's value stream mapping. That's strategic, putting a strategic plan together. The next question is, well, what if you now need to drill down from some of those process blocks and get into the weeds to learn exactly what happens? For example, if you're trying to shave time from that tech, we need to understand what that tech does, step 1, step 2, step 3. If we're trying to shave time off the transcription service, we need to understand how exactly they're doing transcription, etc. So this is a tool that allows you to get into those weeds, and then once you redesign the process at a micro level, it becomes the standard work for everyone moving forward. So it's used as a training tool for new hires, and it's also used to monitor the process. So again, this is not something I can go into all the details of how to create it on one webinar, although I did give both value stream mapping and metrics-based process mapping webinars earlier this year. For those of you who missed them, I will have recorded webinars available, and I'll also be offering them again early in 2011. But metrics-based process map takes the traditional swim lanes that we've learned in TQM, where you have a swim lane for each function, and then it adds together with it the metrics that we've learned through value stream mapping that are key. And it becomes an extremely effective tool for analyzing the current state and being able to see waste, and then designing the future state that's a little more or a lot more waste-free. So for those of you in manufacturing, this is the office equivalent of the standard work combination sheet. And there really wasn't a tool available to use in the office environment until Mike Osterling and I created this about 7 years ago. If you want to know more about it in detail, in our Kaizen event planner in Chapter 12, we do have a very long, detailed version about how to create the manual method using paper and Post-its. And then if you want electronic archiving mechanism, then we have an Excel tool that you can purchase both through Productivity Press, our publisher, and Amazon, Barnes & Noble. All the major booksellers have it. So if you want more details. And then I will eventually have a YouTube series up on metrics-based process mapping. I'm still in the process of recording that. So in either value stream mapping or metrics-based process mapping, you may need to do root cause analysis. In fact, you will likely need to do root cause analysis so that you can start understanding the true reason for the waste. So here's the thing. Those 8 wastes that we went through, those are only symptoms of underlying problems. So for example, motion to shared equipment, we don't have close enough equipment to the workers. Motion to or delays because you're batching maybe twice a day. Physical layout could be the problem, that we don't have our departments physically laid out close to one another, which is necessitating batching, because otherwise it wouldn't make any sense to walk one at a time. So we're introducing this flow stopper into the system simply because the physical layout isn't quite right. You want to get to the true root cause so you don't make the wrong conclusions and don't put an incorrect solution or a Band-Aid on the problem. So again, there was a whole webinar just on root cause analysis earlier this year, but there are many, many tools you can use. If you become highly proficient in just these 4 tools, you will go gangbusters above anyone else who doesn't know these tools. So you can, Google them. There's plenty of books out there, or you can catch the root cause analysis webinar down the road to take a look at these simple tools that help get to the root of a problem. So once you have a very clear understanding of the current state and how the process is currently performing at a macro or a micro level. And once you know the root cause for the wastes that are there, now it's time to design the better process. So there are lots and lots of things that you can do to design a better process. And one of the things that every month or so, it seems to get this wave of process problems with clients where there's the same problem over and over and over. The last 2 months, it's been interruptions. I see so many people that they're delivering poor quality to their downstream customers. They're taking too much time, and they're stressing themselves out beyond belief because of the amount of interruptions they get when they have to, when they think that they have to serve someone else's needs instead of doing the work uninterrupted. The other thing is that it causes an increase in process time, because to get re-engaged and get your mind wrapped back around that work, it takes anywhere from 20 to 50% more time to do the task than it would have if you just did it uninterrupted. So engineering in particular, any kind of analysis, programming, it can be sometimes 20 minutes. Writing also, creative tasks. It can be up to 20 minutes before the workers back to the place they were before they got interrupted. So as far as the tools you have at your disposal to use, there are a whole bunch of them. And again, I have entire webinars on each one of these tools pretty much. And so in the beginning days, when you're just looking at stabilizing a process, you want to look at this whole idea of reorganizing the workplace and putting visuals in place so it's very clear what the work is and how the process is performing. You want to standardize the work so that you allow for the variation that's necessary, but you get rid of the variation that's not necessary, and you can gain better predictability and more consistent quality outcomes, etc. And while you're standardizing it, you build quality at the source, or you error-proof it, so that the standard work is going to be of much higher quality across the board for all the different people that do that task. So you can spend years doing nothing but stabilizing a process before you in a very, kind of a very broken environment. It may take, a couple years to get a process really well designed from a stabilization perspective before you even put any of the fancy tools in place. On the other hand, a very simple process, you can stabilize it very quickly. So once it's stabilized, and actually while you're stabilizing it, while you're creating standard work, you could do some of this fancier stuff that is the tools that we use to enhance the flow. And there are more advanced tools. I'm going to be going through these in tomorrow's webinar, some of them. And the thing that you find with these flow enhancing tools is that if you don't have, for example, standard work in place, it's very difficult to create a pull system. But yet, if you're creating standard work and you can find a way to reduce the need for batches or the frequency of batches, you can increase the frequency of batches and reduce the size, then you would obviously incorporate that into your standard work when you're at the stabilization stage. So lots of things to think about. Tomorrow's webinar will talk a lot about work balancing and tack time, and when can you apply tack time and when can't you apply tack time in the office environment, and when can you when you think you can't. So we'll talk about tack time ad nauseum tomorrow. So now, prioritization. At some point in the improvement process, you're going to have to make some tough choices about what to work on, because there's only so many people, there's only so much time, and you want to work first on the low-hanging fruit and get that dragon slayed first, and then move to the more complicated systems and processes that need to be improved. So this is a very coarse, very easy prioritization matrix that anyone can use. The front lines can use it, where you classify the improvement after you've listed them out and numbered them. You classify them as how easy would this be to implement. And easy could mean in terms of actual physical labor. It could mean politically. It could be financially. How easy would it be? And then what's the benefit? Given the objectives we have of making the improvement, what's the benefit? So you rank these, and it's a pretty quick exercise. And then what you would do is just draw these bands in these logical kind of breaks in the groupings of these improvements, and you would only work on the top left section, the priority section first. Then, once you get all of those implemented, then you have to rethink the whole list, because your set point will have changed. And you may find that you've actually captured some of the improvements on these other ones through the process of implementing these earlier ones. Or it may be that the need for some of these improvements melts away. Or it may be that now one that was in an action becomes monumentally more difficult because of a change you made. So you just have to rethink the whole thing once you make a series of improvements. And at some point, you need to also have an implementation plan on how do you implement all of these countermeasures that are going to be used to realize your future state. It could be over a course of 5 days. It could be over a course of 5 months. And so you have to have some kind of an implementation plan. This is one I use sometimes at value stream mapping, which is a bit of a Gantt chart type of environment, but not exactly a Gantt chart, that shows the beginning and end point for these different kinds of improvements. And then you'll see under these types, if you look down at the bottom here, a KE is a Kaizen event. So these are improvements that will be implemented in a Kaizen event. And then there's projects and just do it's, where you just do it's being very short, less than a day to implement. So at some point you do need to do this kind of ranking and figure out exactly what you're going to be doing and when. Now, one thing I want to mention is the structure that Lean uses is PDCA, Plan, Do, Check, Act. Some organizations have created their own PDCA using different terms. PDSA is another one, which is Plan, Do, Study, Adjust, which was the Shewart model before Deming changed it to PDCA. And then also in Six Sigma, of course, it's DMAIC. And you can use DMAIC for Lean as well if you want. So any of these very scientific models for making improvement need to be always and forever in place. So here in the lower right-hand corner, we see this macro PDCA. Let's just say we did a value stream map, and we are looking at the planning stage, and then let's say we get now to our implementation schedule. Now when you're actually implementing using a Kaizen event or a project, now you have a little mini PDCA that you're using to implement the improvement at a tactical level. So there are multiple levels of PDCA or DMAIC or whatever you have at every stage of the process. The key is that you're always using it and you don't skip any steps. Another key is that the planning is always 50% or more of the total time it takes to actually get the improvement in place and stabilized. 50%. People jump to solutions, they jump into doing, we're chop in this world, but that always, catches you up and ties you up in knots. So planning is the largest stage in the process. Okay, I see our time is at 11 o'clock, so I'll just wrap up with a couple more comments and then we'll get to our Q&A. I don't see any questions coming in yet, by the way, so you can start getting ready to write your questions if you have some. So if you look at the PDCA, I'm not going to read this to you. You can read it yourself, but this gives you the various steps within each one of the stages of the PDCA. I just want to highlight a couple things, is that this is a scientific model that encourages experimentation. Now, you don't want to create experiments that are a big waste of time. They need to be thoughtful experiments, and they need to be based on data, but this is truly about creating a hypothesis. We think this is going to work, and then we experiment with it, and we test it, and we measure it, and then we adjust it if we need to. We implement new models and adjust it if we need to. So it is an experiment. Experimentation needs to be honored in an organization. And then the other thing I want to mention is this whole idea of testing. What happens a lot of the time is that a team will get together and they'll design something, and they'll never take it outside of that team for feedback. And you get a lot more consensus in making improvement if you have a broader number of people that have been involved in the design of an improvement. So that testing phase is critical for gaining consensus, as well as having, a more effective, more efficient way of solving a problem, because more eyes were used to design it and test it. Okay, so now where do you begin? This is often very difficult for someone who's just learning Lean to figure out how to use these various tools and what the proper order is. And the bottom line is there's no one order, and there's no cookie cutter that says you need to do this and then this and then this. Improvement's just not that easy. So if you look at it, I'm trying to simplify it a little bit here without oversimplifying it. If you look at an organization that has a value stream that they know is not performing the way they want to, then in that case you'd start with value stream mapping, and you would create an improvement strategy with an implementation plan, and then you might use Kaizen events, projects, and just do it's to actually implement your improvements, and you might need metrics-based process mapping within those in order to get down to the weeds and to document the new standard work. That would be what I call a grand slam. So then, and by the way, this slide is slightly different than what you have in the materials. I made a modification after I posted them. So if you have a complex problem that's not necessarily any particular value stream, or it's a problem that's just in part of a value stream, but it's complex, then you might use what's called an A3 to go through the systematic PDCA to solve the problem. And again, I had a two-part webinar on A3 earlier this year. And in that case, you may need to use a value stream map to understand the current state, or you may not. It just depends on what the problem is, on whether you need to look across a value stream or not. That kind of a problem yields what I call triples and home runs. And then you want to get this daily Kaizen into the culture of the organization where everyone is skilled at problem solving and everyone's engaged in solving problems on a regular basis. They're not just waiting for projects and Kaizen events and A3s. So you can solve localized problems on a day-to-day basis through just do-its or little mini projects. And you might or you may not need metrics-based process mapping to identify the waste and to document standard work. And that's what I would refer to as a single or a double hit. So there are different levels, and you want all levels occurring all the time, so that the organization's getting, big bangs and also the little bangs that add up. Now, let me actually just bring this all up. Building a whole lean culture or a full lean transformation, everyone knows out there in the improvement world, in the performance world, no matter what the type of performance is, whether it's sports, music, law enforcement, continuous improvement, you name it, it's a 10-year cycle to gain proficiency. It's been proven over and over and over that it takes 10 years to become an expert at anything. So when you think about a whole culture in a whole organization, there are these different stages, if you look to the right here, where at first it's going to be very disruptive and difficult. It's kind of sludging through mud. And then there's a settling in stage where, everyone's starting to understand how to do the work and they're starting to become more comfortable with it. And then you finally get flow, and I don't mean perfection, but you start getting some good flow in about 5 years. Now, in terms of making that transition, you're going to need, whether they're internal lean champions and Six Sigma black belts and all of those folks, or external, you're going to need professional level improvement help to get you through those stages. So it takes a long time. I mean, I personally have had 25 years in working in quality and process design, quality improvement and process design, and I learn every day. So it's one of those things where you have to have seasoned people that know they're skilled in order to help you and teach you and guide you along the way. So you can just see then, if you look internally, that in years 1 and 2, you tend to have only a very small percentage of your staff engaged, and then at 5 years, you really want everyone engaged all the time. And then in terms of Kaizen events, you want to start seeing the reduction in Kaizen events around years 3 and 4, so that you've inbred all that behavior that you use a Kaizen event to shape. You embed that slowly but surely into the DNA of the organization, and then you only need the occasional Kaizen event where you may need lots of them in years 1 and 2. So, don't misuse Kaizen events. Don't think you have to use them for everything, but also don't underutilize them, because they are very powerful in getting people to understand what lean is and how to shape the culture. So the last thing is, as far as building your internal capabilities, I like to divvy up who needs to know what into 4 different buckets. So there's the front lines, and ultimately every single person needs to understand how to operate within a PDCA model and how to do simple root cause analysis. I mean, fishbone diagrams, the 5 whys, easy to teach everybody. They also need to understand the basic terminology and lean principles and tools. Moving up the chain, middle management needs to know all that, and they need to be pretty proficient in A3, because they should be actively engaged in solving problems using A3. They also need to be much more advanced in applying the lean tools and in applying lean philosophy. And then they also are the people that are responsible typically for monitoring processes and assuring sustainability. Moving up again, now we're talking senior leadership. So now we're, director, vice president, and the C-suites, CEO, COO, CFO, CIO, etc. They need all of that, plus they need to understand how to use strategy deployment, or Hoshinkanri, as its Japanese term is. And that's a improvement prioritization mechanism at a very high level tied to business goals, annual business goals. They also need to know at a very advanced level the whole lean philosophy well beyond process design and into business management and so forth. They also need to know a lot about the psychology of change and to understand that this stuff takes time. There's not the ability of staff or a consultant or anyone to come in and sprinkle magic dust and make problems that have been in existence for 10 years go away in a day. It just doesn't happen. So, I spend a fair amount of time helping shape expectations from senior leadership so that they understand what level of resources they have to provide in order to get where they want to go. And then finally, there are the internal improvement professionals. If you have dedicated staff, they need to know everything. They need to have all the skills, all the tools, all the philosophy, psychology of change. They need to know how to convert results into financial terms when it's appropriate. They need to know how to build improvement momentum and sell results across an organization. They have to be excellent teachers. They have to, there's a whole range of, mediation, teaching, all kinds of things that as a facilitator of change you need to have. So lots of development. It doesn't happen overnight. You just start one by one and you start, giving people development and then letting them practice. Give them development and let them practice. Don't stick them in a classroom and give them development and then have them not do anything with it because they'll lose it. So with that said, I guess we're ready to go into our Q&A. I see a couple of questions coming in. I do want to mention that if you're new to these webinars and you want to know about the next ones, I did schedule a 5S visual management webinar for next month in early December. It's if you want to subscribe to my newsletter, you'll get all of those dates as well as new resources that I have found that I think are really powerful. And then you can connect with us in any number of ways through social media. So I thank you very much for your time. Again, that was a very fast overview of Lean. There's a lot to learn, and if you want one great book that's a meaty book, but it's a good one, is The Toyota Way by Jeffrey Liker, L-I-K-E-R, The Toyota Way. If you're serious about Lean, you must read that book as well as others. You should probably be reading a book every 3 weeks or so in your early days. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and take some questions. First question is, how do you start motivating the shop floor workers to involve problem-solving process in beginning implementing Lean? How do you start motivating shop floor workers to involve to problem-solving process in beginning implementing Lean? I'm not quite sure I understand the question, but I'll try to answer. A couple of thoughts that come to mind is that if you have people that are, I don't know whether you have people that are dedicated to improvement or not, but someone's, of course, going to teach people how to use PDCA. And so they need to be taught, and they also need to be given the authority to use PDCA. And so, oftentimes if there's a problem, and let's just say you're stopping the line for a problem, then you just, quickly use the PDCA cycle, and you need to coach them on how to use that. So I guess I would wonder if the lack of motivation is what I sense in your question, whether it's because they don't have the skills, or they don't have an appropriate coach, or what, because people love to solve problems. So having the skills and the authority generally produces a pretty motivated problem solver. I guess that's all I can mention on that one. If you want to just give me another view of the question, maybe I'm not hitting it and I could answer a different way. Thank you for the question. Other questions? I know some of you are very new to Lean, and so I'd be curious to know whether or not you have any questions about how you've either approached it so far or how you want to approach it. I think that would be helpful for you and for me to understand. And then the other thing that if you, have never used value stream mapping, that is one of the first places that you need to get some development in understanding what a value stream is and how to map it so that you can create that improvement strategy. Otherwise, if you don't look at things across the whole system or the value stream, you're very likely going to suboptimize and get one area working really well, but that's not connected to the other areas, and so it doesn't really result in the customer experiencing any benefit to the good work you've done making improvements. So I don't see any other questions coming in. Could you do me a favor, and if you have, okay, there's one more coming in, but if you do have a question that you're writing, if you could just raise your hand, please, and let me know that you have a question coming in, that would be helpful. Okay, great. I see one coming in, so thank you. I'm going to go ahead and take this next question and then allow you all some time to write your questions up. What could be the first measurements? Okay, so again, I'm so sorry. These questions are kind of broad and vague. I mean, so let's just back up for a minute and look at improvement. Improvement is necessary when a process isn't performing as it should. So your measurements need to be whatever's not performing well. So if you're not delivering fast enough to the customer, then that's your measurement. If the quality is not good, then that's your measurement. If you have high turnover, then that's your measurement. I mean, it depends on what the problem is. So maybe you could give me a specific example and I could be more specific in answering your question. Let's see. I'm actually looking on the list of registration to see if I can find what company these questions are coming from so that maybe I can be more effective in answering them. No, I don't know what the company is. So again, I don't know how to answer your question. It depends on how your process is performing. Carlos, I see your hand is up. I'm going to put it down for a second. Oh, there you go. I was going to put it down and see if you wanted to be visually or verbally acknowledged. Okay. I've done the VSM charts by hand, but need to make them pretty for presentations. Can you recommend an inexpensive computer application that we can use? Well, I can recommend a computer application, but it's not inexpensive, I don't think. What I use is called iGraphics, and if you hang on one second, I will end my show. Hang on one second. I'm going to put another slide in place here. Hang on. I'm going to put our show back up. Hang on. Okay, this will allow, oops, hang on. That's not what I wanted to do. Hang on. Let me just get my visual over here. Okay, good. This will allow me to type a little bit. So, iGraphics is now owned by Corel. And that's the software you saw with my value stream maps. I don't know what it costs right now, but I believe it was in the high 400s, I believe. But it is phenomenally easier to use than trying to do them by hand, and it'll take a lot less time once you get it set up. It does take a little learning curve, and it also has more than just value stream mapping on it. It's got some, it's called Flowcharter is the one I use. Let me write that down for you. Flowcharter. So it's got all kinds of other tools that you can use. So feel free to check it out. And I think it's just www.igraphics.com to get to it. Okay, thoughts on lean games for training. Oh, good question. So I use a couple different things. One for the actual showing a transformation of a traditionally designed process into a lean process. I use one that I created myself called Alphabet Soup. So it takes a team through 3 rounds from a very traditional, functionally based departments that aren't physically located next to one another to a streamlined process co-located. We implement standard work. We implement flow. And then on the third round, we remove QC because we build quality at the source and we balance the work. And it's a timed game, so it's a competition, and we give them prizes and all that good stuff. So I use that, but it's not something I sell, and I created it myself. You can probably buy some online, but I don't know anything other than the Lego airplane exercise and the paper airplane folding game that you can buy online that are a little more for manufacturing than they are office. That's why I made up my own. If anyone on the call knows of a good office-based simulation or a game, that would be great. The other thing I can tell you is for standard work and helping people understand the benefits of standard work, I use this pig game that I actually stole from another organization. Shamelessly stole, but I got their permission. And it's a really cool thing. It's, again, 3 rounds, and you have people, you give them a blank sheet of paper and just tell everyone to draw a pig. And you get all this high variety, and they have fun doing it, and they giggle and all that stuff. And then you give them a grid, and you give them handwritten, standard operating procedures that tell them how to draw the pig using that grid. And they get wildly frustrated because the instructions aren't so easy to see and understand. And in the third round, you give them the same grid with the same instructions, but it's got a visual, and it shows the power of visuals because everyone's pig looks the same after the third round. So that's kind of a fun one. There's a cup stacking game I play to show the power of setup reduction and what happens if you get interrupted, and it's a timed game. What other games do I play? I have, mapping simulations that I use for value stream mapping to teach that, and metric space process mapping. I can't think of all my games. I love games. So those are some ideas, but again, I don't know if any of these are available for you to purchase. Cindy has a thing about Visio as another value stream mapping tool. So I assume, Cynthia, that you mean the Visio where you're adding the Excel component to it, because the key with value stream mapping is you've got to have the metrics. Value stream maps, and I'll just say this once because we don't want to get into value stream mapping extensively, but value stream mapping has a couple of key things that make it a value stream map. One of them is that you've got material flow or data flow in the case of an office and information flow. You have to have information flow on it. And then the other thing is that it's got the key metrics, the time and quality metrics. So the Visio quote value stream maps I've been seeing are absolutely not value stream maps, not even close. So what you may be talking about is Visio that has an Excel component so that you can deal with the metrics, but Visio produces typically flowcharts, not value stream maps. Also, value stream maps things are being called value stream maps that are not, that are process maps. A value stream map is, each block is a handoff or a delay in the timeline, which is typically a handoff from one department or work group to another, whereas a process level map might have multiple steps for the same person to go through to produce their work. So I see a ton of misunderstanding out there on what a value stream map is. You may or may not be sharing this misunderstanding, but if you get Learning to See or the book I showed you, that's classic value stream mapping, and that will help you if you're using it at too low of a level. One last thing you heard me say very quickly in the webinar maybe, or you may have missed me saying it, is that leadership is involved in value stream mapping because you're setting strategy. So while you can have people in the front lines on the teams need to be heavily weighted for toward those that can authorize the future state. Okay, so that is it on value stream mapping. Are there any other questions coming in? If you could maybe just click your hand, raise your hand if you have any questions, or if you want to ask a question verbally, you can also raise your hand. Okay, so Penny, do you want to ask your question verbally? Okay, I guess not because it just came through written. Thoughts, standard length for lean training. Oh, good question. So I like to think of training in multiple levels. There's awareness building, there's developing understanding, and there is skill development. So I'll go ahead and type this here. Let's see, so training levels. Okay, so awareness, understanding, skill development, and then there's, expertise. So each one of these is going to take different amounts of time. So from an awareness perspective, you could teach people some of the lean terminology and basic concepts in half day with no games or no real application. This is basically 4 hours in a classroom, and it's like traditional teaching, and it's mildly effective, not even moderately effective. You could do a full day for awareness heightening, and then the simulation that I use, for example, takes about an hour and a half, and they get a chance to actually live it. So that is a little more, deeper awareness. But again, at the end of that, they need to understand what to do to apply what they've learned. Then understanding, I would say it depends on who it is. If it's leadership, ultimately everybody needs hours and hours and hours of development, but I don't think you should give that all up front, because you want to just help people get proficiency at different levels before they move on. So, I often will do a 2-day overview for managers and above to help them gain a deeper understanding. Senior leadership, getting them for an hour is a challenge, but I pretty much, if I'm going to start working with the company on an ongoing basis, I pretty much won't work with them unless I can get the senior leaders all the way up to the CEO for at least a day. And it could be 2 half days, but at least a day. Now, this isn't a Fortune 100 sized company. These are, moderate sized companies, but if they want to get on the lean journey seriously, it's going to take them really understanding what their role is as a lean leader. Skill development, I have a lean certificate program that I offer on-site when organizations have 10 or more people that they want to train, and it's 72 classroom hours. So it's like a certificate program you can get through the extension programs of major universities. There's a project in it. It's over a course of months, so they can work their project like a Six Sigma Black Belt or Green Belt program. But it's a lot of learning, a lot of skill development, and I also include a ton about the psychology of change and facilitation, which a lot of programs don't include, and that's 72 classroom hours. So if you have internal staff that you want to be highly proficient in leading change, they're going to ultimately need that amount of training. And then finally, expertise. If you want people to be able to be like, master black belts and lean senseis and really have expertise, it's just an ongoing training process. So, starting with 4 to 7 hours of classroom time for general awareness. And I kind of consider that the sales side of lean, where you're selling people on the concepts and what it can do for them to get them kind of excited and energized about lean, all the way through, a very lengthy program. I'm sorry that was such a long answer, but I think that organizations often think that they can throw people in a room for 4 hours and they're going to come out with some skills they can apply immediately, and that isn't usually the case. Okay, thank you. I'm glad you agree, Penny. Okay, Cynthia's back. We're back talking about Visio. They are VSMs with the appropriate VSM icons, not physically connected to Excel, but you do add the metrics in there. VSMs, not important. Okay, great. Oh, I'm sorry. You should have told me not to do it out loud at the beginning. Sorry about that. So good. I'm glad to hear that you're doing real VSMs with metrics, and it's a real VSM. Excellent. I just find that iGraphics is very easy, drag and drop, and you can have a map produced in a matter of minutes. Okay, let's see. Oh, Carlos, thank you so much for your kind comment. Thank you, and I'm glad to help. Thank you. Any other questions? Any other questions being written? If you want to raise your hand quickly and let me know if you have something in the works. Okay, well, I don't see any hands coming up, so I'm going to assume that that's a wrap. I want to thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you got a lot out of it. There is a survey when you log off. If you exit out the right way with file and then exit webinar, you'll get that. I would really appreciate your comments. And then I'm sure I'll be seeing some of you or seeing your names on the list tomorrow for the Advanced Lean class. And also feel free to sign up for the 5S and Visual Management webinar I just scheduled through my website. Thanks very much and have a great day. Bye-bye.